We're into the second week of getting no response on hotlines connected to North Korea. On top of the silence, leader Kim Jong-un appears to have skipped a visit to the commemorative mausoleum, the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun, to mark his late grandfather's birthday. For more on this, let's turn to Professor Brian Myers from Dongseo University. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Good morning. First off, like I said, Kim Jong-un doesn't appear to have visited the mausoleum built to commemorate Kim Il-sung on his late grandfather's birthday over the weekend. Professor, why is that?
Well, he didn't visit the mausoleum 3 years ago either, and it's the 111th anniversary of Kim Il-sung's death, I believe, so it's not a particularly round number. It's not a particularly important anniversary. The outside world, I think, tends to look at any change in North Korea's routine as a sign of instability or maybe the leader's poor health. But my impression from reading North Korean speeches over the past few years is that Kim Il-sung's importance to the political culture as a whole has been receding. And I see that as a reflection of a certain confidence on the part of his grandson. His regime has been performing very well by its own military first standards, if not by our standards of economic growth, let alone human rights. So Kim Jong-un may well feel that he doesn't need to rely on his grandfather's myth to quite the extent that he used to. And finally, this is the age of drones and drone attacks, so it makes good security sense for Kim Jong-un, just as it does for America's adversaries in the Middle East and everywhere else, not to be completely predictable about his whereabouts on any given day.
I see. Also, we cannot now talk about the missile launch that took place last week. What's behind North Korea's decision to resume missile activities on top of cutting the inter-Korean hotlines? Is there a particular reason?
Well, I think the main motivation for this latest missile launch was a technological one. Namely, the North wanted to test launch a solid fuel ICBM after years of testing short-range ballistic missiles. Each step in the North's nuclear program naturally leads to the next step up. And that technological progress follows its own timetable. And I think just as much attention is given to things like weather conditions as to dates in the calendar. At the same time, of course, every successful test sends propaganda messages in different directions. For the North Korean people themselves, it's another demonstration of the great success of the military first policy. For the South Koreans, and this, I think, is also where cutting the hotlines comes in, it's intended to show that North Korean provocations will always increase when a conservative government is in power here. And finally, perhaps most importantly, it's meant to show the Americans once again that they cannot hope to slow down the North's nuclear progress through sanctions.
Right. Now that you've just mentioned the North's latest ICBM dubbed the Hwasong-18, let's talk about the latest ICBM. What do we know about this ICBM and what makes it more advanced from previous ones?
Well, its predecessor was the liquid-fueled Hwasong-17. The regime last tested that in March. It's supposed to have an operational range of about 15,000 kilometers, which is far enough to reach the United States. Now, we're not all that sure about the range of this Hwasong-18 yet. But the most important difference is that it's solid-fueled, which means that instead of having to be fueled in plain sight very slowly before a launch, which would give the Americans a kind of advance notice, the Hwasong-18 can be more or less suddenly wheeled out of nowhere with a full tank, as it were, and then fired so quickly that the enemy doesn't have enough time to respond or to launch a preemptive strike. So this kind of missile poses a much greater threat to the United States than the conventional liquid-fueled type of ICBM like the Hwasong-17. Now, the South Koreans have been trying to downplay this latest news, saying it was just a mid-range test, we don't know how far it can go. And we know from those leaked American documents that have been in the news for the past few days that the White House believes Pyongyang is, quote-unquote, overselling its nuclear capability. But I think most Western nuclear experts agree that it would be very foolhardy of the United States not to proceed from the assumption that the North now has a solid-fueled ICBM capability.
I see. Before we let you go, Professor Myers, let's go back to the now cut off inter-Korea hotlines. Some experts say the lines will not be restored anytime soon. Are you on the same page? I mean, when do you think the lines will be back up and running again?
Yeah, I think the hotlines are unlikely to be restored during President Yoon's term because the North wants the South Korean electorate to believe that inter-Korean relations are always going to get worse when the conservatives are in power here. I think if South Korea were to cancel military exercises or make some other concession, the North might restore the hotlines for a while. But I think too much fuss is made about these hotlines. The truth of the matter is that inter-Korean communication has never depended on these hotlines. The two states have historically conducted most of their communication through other more discreet channels. And we also need to understand that even when the hotlines are allegedly operational, the North routinely refuses to accept calls from South Korea. That happened during the Moon administration as well. So I think the main function of these hotlines is as a low-risk way for Pyongyang to signal its satisfaction or dissatisfaction with whatever is going on down here. And I expect the two states will continue communicating under the water, as Koreans say, or behind the scenes if they have something important to discuss. But these symbolic hotlines will probably not be reconnected until the South makes some sort of concession to the North.
I see. They are pretty symbolic and they haven't done any harm yet so far, so let's keep a close eye on it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Professor Myers. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Sure thing.